Hello everyone and welcome to today's SPM Summit Online Recharge. Our topic today is getting to the real why, using artificial intelligence to obtain actionable customer insights for product evolution. And the focus will be on using artificial intelligence techniques to analyze unstructured data. So it's not about the more well-known classic number crunching approaches. Our speakers today are Tim Rietz from the Karlsruhe Institute of Technology. He'll talk about how artificial intelligence can be used to automatically conduct requirement interviews and to analyze and extract concepts from those interviews. And that's done via a chatbot and in a scalable fashion, obviously. Our second speaker will be Tommy Thalgren from ivo.ai, and he'll present how artificial intelligence can be used to generate customer insights from large amounts of unstructured data that software companies often already have, for example, from emails with customers, from support tickets, or from user feedbacks through the website, for example, and how that can be used to steer iterative product development. The third part will be a panel discussion with both speakers, with Tim and Tommy. It's hosted by me. I'm Barbara Heusel from the PD7 group. The session has been recorded, and participants had the opportunity to ask questions via chat. And we have the three parts: the first presentation by Tim, the second presentation by Tommy, and then a panel discussion with participants and questions from the audience. Now, just a little bit of background, who is organizing this. This event is brought to you by the IFPMA. What's really special about the IFPMA, we are a community of researchers and practitioners and other experts, and we promote the profession of software product management and professionalize it, and we are really independent from individual training providers, and that's a big difference to many other product management expert groups. And as part of our offering, we have in the IFPMA developed a body of knowledge for software product management. And just as one example from that body of knowledge, I'm sharing the reference architecture here. We have recently updated the entire, or are in the process of updating the entire body of knowledge. Large parts have been updated already, including this reference architecture. And I just wanted to say our materials, for example, syllabi for the different certification trainings and so on, that's all available for free on our website. You will see the URL here. And today's topic, just for some context, it squarely fits into this area that we call customer insight. Yeah, and with that, I would like to hand off to our first speaker, or introduce our first speaker before handing off. So Tim is a researcher at the Karlsruhe Institute of Technology, and he will present how artificial intelligence can be used to really autonomously conduct requirements interviews, and then also how to analyze these interviews later on to extract concepts from there. And so doing that in a scalable fashion, because once you automate it, you can do it really with a lot of people. So I'm very excited to hear from Tim.
Thanks, Barbara. Then let me share my screen. All right. Do you see my slides?
Yes.
Perfect.
So the stage is yours. Thank you, Tim.
Nice, thanks. Yeah, thank you for the nice introduction. I'm glad to be here today, alongside Tommy and Barbara and all of you, of course. Since this is an online recharge meeting, I was trying to not make it too academic or too technical or too boring to follow. I was trying to keep the slides as lean as I could, and will just, in the next 30 minutes, guide you through my topics, the topics of my research, and also practical applications. in a little bit of detail. I will try to focus on telling a few anecdotes and hopefully telling you something that you didn't know before, and hopefully inspiring you to use well, AI-based technologies as well for your daily work. And as Barbara already said, the topic of both my research and the talk I give today is scalable requirements interviews and analysis using AI. And this little image that I brought to you is pretty much how I always envisioned this kind of process, because in the media or in discussions or in research papers, if you are into these kind of things, the topic of AI is usually discussed as a danger to the workforce. It has, or it creates problems in terms of reducing human judgment from certain processes, and is feared to sort of replace the human and the empathy or empathic capabilities that humans have in certain scenarios. And in my research, from the get-go, I never intended to follow a path of replacing humans by machines and saying, okay, the process of requirements elicitation and learning about customer, getting user insights is to be replaced by machines. We don't need this anymore. The idea for me really was, how can machines serve as a team member, as somebody in a sort of human AI tandem, to help me as a software product manager or as a requirements engineer or as a researcher. And to kick this off, the first important thing to understand is data and sort of the concept of high-performing organizations, and what data collection analytics even, well, why does it matter? And the general idea here is that there was, well, this consultant company, McKinsey, they conducted a study in 2015. They also repeated every 3 years on what makes a company be a high-performing company. And what they found through their surveys is that, amongst other things, high-performing companies utilize data differently. Specifically, the high-performing organizations, they have a sort of availability of data in the first place. That's important. If you don't have anything, you can't really analyze anything. And secondly, they also have the capabilities of analysis, of leveraging this data to make, well, well-informed decision and improve their offerings. In particularly, if you look in the graphics to the left, what you see here is that most importantly, these kinds of high-performing organizations, they provide access to data. They have tools and also expertise to work with, especially also unstructured data, with what a lot of data looks like in practice. And also they have sort of self-serving analytics capabilities, which I will also talk to you about in the future a little bit. So the takeaway from this is, if you, well, want customer insights or user insights, firstly, you have to have data available. And secondly, you have to have some sort of some techniques, technologies, methods, tools, knowledge, expertise to understand these data and make informed decisions. And on this path towards sort of a data-driven product management, data doesn't really equal data. There are many different types of data that we can collect during research processes or during well, practical projects. And we categorize these data types into four, well, clusters. First off, you have market data. It's data that's usually created by sort of market research agencies or available online, maybe in social media, which can inform us about technology trends, about general broad market requirements, demographic data, and so on. And if we look a little bit more into our own organizations, the data we find is, for example, data about partners that we work with. Could be related to a process, how we involve working with partners, sort of risk that is connected or risk data, partner performance information, certain milestones that you set out to achieve that help us to plan the projects or plan interactions with our partners. And then this talk that I'm giving here is focusing more on the right side about user and customer data specifically, which are the user insights, as Barbara mentioned, usage data, for example, if you have available products for customers already, where they can give feedback to user feedback, and that all this information sort of boils down ideally to user requirements that help us make or build better products or evolve our products. And then also some data is directly connected to products, marketing and sales planning, release planning, product performance, and so on. And these types of data, especially user requirements, is critical to make informed decisions, but it depends, the quality of the data that we have or the information we can draw from individual data types depends on if we look at sort of this big data phenomenon or the small data, how we can call it, phenomenon. And big data is, well, essentially all the data you can collect on large scale easily, in air quotes, which can come from social media, customer service data, for example, if you get requests, log data, especially if you track your processes somehow, or if you track the customer feedback. Competitor data can be a type of big data as well. It's usually somewhere in between small and big. But then if you look at the lower end, the small data, this is the data that tends to be really detailed and tends to provide a lot of information and insights into how customers feel or how employees feel. And that can be actually very well used to improve upon the offerings that a company has. And these small data is usually created by the most famous tool, or one of the most famous techniques in requirements elicitation, which is interviews, requirements interviews, or focus groups, if you pretty much invite more people to one interview. And why these interviews in particular are a great tool to understand and identify right requirements, and actually understand what the sort of deeper needs and desires of users, customers, or employees also are. Interviews unfortunately face challenges concerning the costs involved. They're highly training intensive, as I mean, pretty much everybody could perform an interview, but might end up not asking the right question or biasing the participants in some way. And they're also incredibly time consuming. Another commonly cited issue with interviews is that they're location bound. And I put this into like little dotted lines here, because I think especially with the changes that came upon us in the last 1 or 2 years, the availability of sort of video call conferencing tools has increased a lot. And therefore, location might not even be the issue anymore, but still interviews are still time bound. So I have to take time out of my day to give the interview, to be the interviewer, and so on. And all these issues severely restrict the scalability of this interview technique. So in general, I as a researcher, for example, I wanted access to interview information. I wanted to approach students, for example, or other researchers or users of my tools and learn from them, but the interview tools or the interview as a tool itself is not scalable due to the presented challenges. So I set out in my research to identify how we can leverage AI for the scalable collection and analysis of particular user requirements in new product development or major release development. And so far, I didn't really talk much about analysis, but what's important to understand, also looking into the capabilities of AI technologies as a whole, is that even if I can conduct interviews at scale and involve as many users as I want without me spending all my work days, I end up with a lot of information. And this information is not, usually not easily quantifiable. So I can't just put it into Excel and then get a great idea of what the people I interviewed actually told me or what I can learn. But it's qualitative information, it's unstructured, and it's not easy to understand. And therefore, getting back to this image on the slide, usually you find yourself, if you think about analysis, but in particular in the bottom left part, in the inside sort of triangle, where AI is used a lot to understand information, find relationships, and help me as a human maybe see something in data that on my own and without any assistance I could not. On the other hand, there are also other applications. For example, if I conduct an interview and if I would let an AI conduct an interview, I would be in the bottom right triangle of engagement, where we usually look into what is called conversational agents. Most of you might know them as sort of text-based chatbots. Nowadays, we can find them in a lot of company websites online, and I can ask my question and hopefully get a response really quick and be satisfied. This all falls under the engagement sort of AI technologies. And then at the top, we have the automation. This can be related to a lot of things. It's defined as sort of well, automating digital or physical services that I could perform. For example, robot process automation is a very current topic for automating business processes in companies. But you can also think about manufacturing robots in a big plant, for example. And through these techniques, we thought, okay, how can we now combine existing technologies, maybe solve challenges with existing technologies to end up with a family of tools that does data collection and data analytics for this specific research case that we had well in mind, and which ended up sort of being user requirements elicitation. And what we did is come up with two tools in particular. Firstly, the first tool is called Letterbot. It is a conversational agent, a chatbot, which uses the lettering technique from psychology, which I absolutely do not expect you to know, which is why we'll introduce it on the next slide. All you have to know for now, it's a chatbot with which you talk that conducts requirements interviews with customers or with employees or whoever you want to collect requirements from. And then on the second side of the tool family, we have Cody, which is a tool that takes all this information that we collected from interviews and helps me as a, well, in my case, as a researcher, to figure out what the information is that we will collected through all of these interviews. And now I talked about this lettering already. Now let me give you a short idea of how this looks like. Lettering, while it is a sort of a cognitive technique from psychology, so it's about understanding why people do what they do, what are the means that motivates them to pursue certain ends. It actually is a rather common technique to be used in interviews and also in requirement solicitation interviews. And actually, I guess all of you probably know the essential fundamentals of lettering interviews, because it's all about asking why. If you look at the most simple or straightforward form of a lettering interview, it will remind you of a child asking about the world, because that's pretty much it. You ask a question, you get a reply, and you ask why. And then you get a reply, hopefully, and you ask why again. And you continue on and on and on until you're satisfied, or until you reach sort of the value that's behind, well, the attribute that you're pretty much eliciting. Because lettering essentially combines three levels of abstractness in the concept that it talks about. We start with a concrete attribute, and it's sort of a physical, observable characteristic of a product. For example, we did interviews to understand why users use smartphones, which you don't see because of my screen. So, why people interact with smartphones, what is important to them, and particularly if you're a player in the mobile industry, these insights can inform you on how to maybe come up with new marketing campaigns, or well, essentially how you can improve your products or achieve differentiation from offerings in the App Store, for example. So we asked, okay, here's a smartphone. What are the attributes or what are the functions you most commonly use on your phone? And we get responses like camera, Instagram, WhatsApp, and so on. The second part of the chain is consequences, and consequences describe concrete benefits or costs that are sort of provided or connected to this particular attribute. For example, the attribute of camera achieves digital storage for me. I can store my memories. And finally, the highest level of abstractness is reached with values, which outline concrete wishes, goals, and needs that are achieved, and that help me understand why particular functions are commonly used, are important, or are essential for, well, selling a product pretty much. And the questions you ask are really straightforward. I mean, everything you need is sort of the why question, and you might even throw in the occasional what question, as you see in the example. So you would start with, what functions do you most frequently use? Why do you use this particular function? What do you obtain by using this function? And then finally, and why is this important to you? And as I mentioned before, the output of these conversations, if you break them down, can be rather simple. For example, I have some function connected to the communication attribute, for example, WhatsApp. What do I want to achieve with this? I want to improve or enable communication, simply because for many people, calling somebody is more difficult than just sending a quick text message. And then the ultimate value that I want to achieve with this is socialization. And this was important because imagine a requirements interview, or imagine any interview for this sort. If you do this interview yourself, you might have a specific goal in mind, you have a structure in mind, you know how to ask questions and how to react. And if we want to use AI to perform this task, we have to give the AI something that they can use as a guiding structure for the interview context. It's very hard to just build a sort of a general AI chatbot that you can throw into any conversational situation and that will just, well, give a conversation. In particular, if you actually achieve or want to achieve a goal with this conversation. I mean, a small talk bot has been done and is doable. But if you want to end up with insight, with requirements, you need to follow a strategy. And ideally, this strategy is inspired by something that humans who have years and years of experience with conducting requirements interviews already deemed appropriate. And therefore, we found that the lettering technique is very promising for conducting interviews. And in the short demo, I just wanted to show you how this initial prototype we used for one particular study looks like. I do not expect you to actually read the conversation, especially since it's in German. For me, I just brought this demo to you to give you a look and feel of the general prototype that we developed. And what you see here is to kick the conversation off, the chatbot would ask or would introduce the context a little bit, and then would ask for 3 concrete examples of functions users would use on a smartphone. And then they would start with the first function that was mentioned and prompts the user to please tell the bot why this particular function is important for the user. User would reply, and then the chatbot would ask, in this instance, what feeling do you achieve with this particular answer or attribute that you just mentioned? And would go pretty much on and on using different questioning techniques. And without going into too much technical detail, the bot tries to come up with a question that sort of works in the context of the conversation without too much fancy AI technology actually being involved. Because ideally, or in an obvious scenario, and whenever you will read some publications or some media outlet publication about AI, it's usually about data. Like, how much data do I have to perfectly train this chatbot to perfectly react to my scenario? And I mentioned the use cases before. We have, for example, new product development, and we have product evolution or major releases. And particularly if we want to do exploratory research, but because I want to develop a new product, I might not have much information about this particular domain. So how do I train a chatbot if I don't know the domain myself? And therefore, we try to develop the chatbot in a way that it works without requiring magnitudes of data to get it going in the first place. And the second thing I want you to take away from this visualization is that also recent studies have shown that it's very hard for participants to actually follow the interview and remember everything that has been said without a visualization. And therefore, on the right side, we provided participants with a tree that shows the specific topics that were relevant in the conversation. And then secondly, well, we conducted about 250 interviews, which was way too much to analyze in a reasonable fashion, particularly if we're not just interested in how many participants were there and how many answers did they provide, but really go into each interview and understand it in detail. And therefore, we developed a second tool, which we call Cody, because it's supposed to support the process of qualitative coding. It's one step of qualitative data analysis, in particular with research focus. So what you will not see here is interactive and interesting dashboards where you plug in your data and see relevant information straight up. Tommy will show you more about this in a second. What you will see here is sort of an interaction process that was important for this particular research case, where the idea is that you as a user interact with the data, look through the information, and identify instances that are really important for whatever the research scenario you have, and label it yourself. However, this is not feasible for 250 interviews. So the idea here is that for the labels that you apply to text, the tool provides you with a suggestion for a rule that would highlight why this particular part of text might have been interesting to you. And this rule suggestion is not meant as the perfect example of why this is important, but it's meant as an inspiration towards, or for you as a user to think about, okay, why do I actually care about this piece of information? And how can I tell the machine to better understand what I'm doing here? So the user is meant to, as you see in the example, the user is meant to actually work with the tool, update the rules, and teach the tool how to better help you with, well, understanding the information. Because the second thing this tool does is it trains a machine learning model in the background on all the examples that you've provided the tool with and on the rules that you provided the tools with, to eventually, while working through the data and like doing this in an iterative fashion, in a way that you end up with a system that can actually help you understand all of the data without any more coding being feasible or being necessary. For example, you have 250 interviews. You work through the first 20 or 30 to get a feel of the information of the interviews. And by then you have created enough labeled information for the system to understand what you're doing. And it just gives you a result for the remaining 220 interviews. And these were individual research projects. So the next step we took, which also might be interesting to you, because how would you apply this in your particular organizations, is we try to come up with a progress and a structure that combines all these steps into one tool, which we call Respeak, that helps you to collect data, analyze data, and get to the insights at the very end. And this process is well, has 5 steps. You configure an interview assistant, distribute it to whoever you want to interview via a link. The automated assistant conducts the interviews on your behalf. The data that is aggregated gets feedback into this analysis system, and you can use the interaction with the analysis assistant to come up with insights, and finally have interesting visualizations or insightful visualizations that help you understand what's going on. And after having created this tool, we undertook 3 projects where we actually evaluated it in practice. The first one was a qualitative research project at the Karlsruhe Design and Decision Lab, which is sort of an in-house research organization we have here in Karlsruhe. And then we conducted a second experiment in user-driven development at a large telecommunications provider, and a third project in requirements collection with a large manufacturing company. And to give you a few sort of key numbers of what happens in a practical evaluation, at this telecommunications company, we applied this sort of, the context user-driven development refers to that we were conducting our project there to actually improve an in-house chatbot. So ironically, we used the chatbot to improve another chatbot by inviting humans to help us. And what we did is, compared to the amazing requirements engineering tool that is Excel, we achieved an increase of 319% in the feedback that, or in the requirements that we actually collected with our interview assistant. And at the same time, this feedback that we collected was about 7% more accurate than just the random Excel feedback. So it's not just gibberish, it's actually qualitative, valuable insights. And what was very nice for us, or very important for us to hear, is that the people we actually included with our tools, they didn't feel like junior picks and never want to participate in any study ever again. They liked being involved through this tool. They like to be part of decisions and of development projects, and they were excited by the chance to participate. And secondly, in the qualitative research study in the KD2 lab, we saw that compared to established tools, surveys, for including a large number of participants, our tools collected 120% more answers compared to a survey, and also about 30% longer answers. And what made us, or me in particular, because I needed the data, very happy, is that we were able to conduct 256 interviews in only 1 week. And by the way, one of the most interesting findings we had regarding smartphones was that, contrary to common belief, convenience was not the primary goal of smartphone users. So just because an app is free, a user might still go and pay for an app if it's better, or helps them better to achieve their primary goals in smartphone usage, which are self-optimization and socialization, by the way. And thirdly, at the employee interview study at the manufacturing company, It was a really short study. We focused on a short interaction, a limited time frame, and wanted to see how much structure we could provide them to come up with information quickly. And we collected 24 requirements in 50 minutes, which was a good result for us. We saw that the conversation that the chatbot uses, and compared to well-established templates or what was going on in the company anyways, we saw that it felt more like a conversation than a template. And also the communication that was encouraged felt more like thinking about what is actually important, coming up with requirements that matter, rather than dumping ideas on developers' table, how the process usually was perceived. And also, we could significantly improve the structure and documentation of requirements, measured in ease of use and guidance, which were sort of scientific modules that we applied, by over 40%. And coming to, drawing to a close, coming to a conclusion a little bit. Overall, my research, or our research, I mean, the group has very different topics that we deal with. This is just one part of what we do. But what we see is that, well, there is a need to understand and explore the potential of data. However, the right data must be available. And we saw that AI technologies can be very helpful to collect and analyze data to enable the involvement of a wide audience of users at scale. And that with our latest product, Respeak, that we can combine human and AI following an interactive paradigm, which is very important to help organizations involve wide audiences. And with that, I'm through with my little keynote. I hope I didn't bore you, and I hope you still have coffee left. I'm looking forward to your questions, either now or later, maybe during the Q&A. And if you have any questions after our Q&A session today, or if you think about questions tomorrow, feel free to drop me an email, and I will get back to you as soon as I can. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Tim. That I still find it totally exciting to be able to do these kind of interviews at scale. And I just wanted to ask, yeah, we already, I just wanted to mention, we still have like 2-3 minutes for questions specifically for Tim. One question in the chat is Respeak already available for other organizations?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Actually, not yet. We are still in, because it takes some time to actually take something from science and put it into practice. We are still sort of in the incorporation phase. It will be available, I guess, by the end of this year. But if you're interested in working with us on this front, then let me know.
Okay, any other questions from the audience?
Hey, hi, this is Abhijit. Can I ask a couple of questions?
Sure. Yes, please. Let's see how it goes.
Thanks, Tim. Thanks for the wonderful presentation. It's always kind of exciting to see the use of technology, how far it's reaching, and the advantages that it's providing, not just to the software product managers, but the entire organization, the ecosystem as such. But my question is more towards how the scale of this application is. And when I look at a B2C kind of a user surveys and kind of market research and collection of the requirements, wherein you need to do these interviews or surveys at a scale, wherein you have to roll out these surveys in a short period of time or get those feedback in less than a week or in a week's time, wherein you need to get in thousands and 10,000s of interviews done. How would this be useful in a B2B, in terms of there would be very focused kind of interviews, and there would be very, I mean, big accounts with less number of people involved in it, wherein the sales cycles are too long. That's one.
Yeah.
And second is how, I mean, when you talk about, and again, specifically kind of considering the B2B scenario out here, the user interaction, when you talk about a B2B, understanding the pains, because not always what the customer or the client says, they mean that. I mean, it always in terms of how you work with them, and it's not, sometimes the interview is not as structured as you expect it to be. So Can you have some lights on that?
Yeah, I think that's a very important question. At the very beginning of my presentation, I talked about this. I do not want to replace sort of the human interviewer. And I think there will always be contexts where human interviews are either enough or they are required because, as you mentioned, the structure is so specific and it's more about the interpersonal connection rather than the information, which I see especially in a B2B context. The idea here is that in any scenario, so either B2C or B2B, I would always see product managers or whoever wants to conduct interviews conduct a few interviews themselves just to get a feel of the customer and get a feel of the problems, and then maybe outsource another 500 interviews to an AI tool to see if the few assumptions I made from a few interviews, well, if they work at scale as well. And specifically in this B2B context that you mentioned, referring to your first question, I think that it, well, heavily depends on the context. If you think about a manufacturing company that might have a lot of suppliers, it might still take quite some time to interview all these suppliers and ask them for their involvement. You might focus on a few sort of key customers, I guess, key accounts, talk to them. But thinking about the effect that the chance to be involved and to matter in a process, the feeling that it also can give to a supplier, for example, it might still be valuable to ask every supplier to contribute with an AI tool and then interview a few key accounts yourself, for example. But I'd completely agree with you. If you only have sort of 5 B2B customers that really matter to you, you always would conduct these interviews face to face, pretty much.
I mean, interesting. I see good application of this in a B2B as well. And Tim, we are in an interesting phase wherein we are launching a couple of big products, and I certainly would love to connect more on how we can leverage this. But yeah, thank you.
Would love to talk to you about this. Thank you.